Good morning. I'm Malcom Graham-Wood, and today on my CEO interview with Core Finance London, I'm delighted to welcome my guest, Paul Griffiths, who's the CEO of Predator Oil and Gas. Welcome, Paul, and thank you very much for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Malcolm. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Good stuff. We'll come back to the detail in a few minutes, but I wanted to begin with, I always ask people, particularly when you maybe haven't done one before, perhaps you could just give an overview of Predator for the viewers who don't know too much about the company yet, please.
Okay, we're a standard listed company on the London Stock Exchange. We listed it in 2018. We're focused on three countries, Trinidad, Morocco and Ireland. And the ethos for setting up the company was to reduce CO2 emissions and reflect the change in our industry that is happening now, but we foresaw it in 2017 and 18 when we set up the company.
Good stuff. I'd like to go into the sort of three main areas that you work in bit by bit and in a bit more detail, if I may. So why don't we start with Morocco? We met in Morocco last year. You were just finalising the Guercif asset. Talk us through it in a bit of detail, if you would, Paul.
Okay, so Guercif is a permit in Morocco onshore that we had looked at, or management had looked at previously. And when the opportunity came to take the license last year, in March last year, we moved very, very quickly to secure the license before any competition set in. And the reason why we looked at that particular license was the first potential well location that we've selected is just 2 kilometers from the Maghreb pipeline, the gas pipeline. So immediately it gives it kind of an attractive location in terms of monetizing a gas discovery. Secondly, it was cheap drilling. Wells here cost a couple of million sterling. And also it was a proven hydrocarbon play, very similar to Raab Basin and SDX's acreage, for example. But the fundamental difference was that Guercif offered the opportunity for very, very large prospects and had been undrilled and untested in those particular areas. The last well in this particular area is 1972 that we're focused on. So it gave us the opportunity to look for big gas, for gas to power in simple reservoirs, close to infrastructure, and an opportunity, obviously, to monetize early in the event of a successful well.
Okay, so what's the timing on the well? I know you've been held up by the virus, but what's the situation, please?
So as we sit here right now, we should have completed the well and been testing gas. But of course, COVID-19 came along at the beginning of March. And in common with other areas around the world, it makes it very, very difficult, obviously, to move technical people across frontiers, etc. So we're still in the position where the rig is stacked in Morocco, safely stacked. We've got our drilling program together. We've got a list of our service providers, etc. We've visited the site. We've got environmental approval. So everything's ready to go. But we can't press the button until we're allowed to do so by the Moroccan authorities and our partner ONHYM. And the situation right now is that Morocco is still in lockdown till the 10th of August. So we don't know what that position will be after the 10th of August. But the key factor is to get people across international frontiers. So right now, as you'll see in our new corporate presentation, we've taken the view that by October, there'll be a relaxing of COVID-19 travel restrictions, and that we should be in a position then to drill before the end of the year, most likely December. But that absolutely depends on the COVID-19 restrictions, which we have no control over. But we're ready to go. We have the plan, and we have the schedule revised to deliver the well this year.
Okay, I've got 3 follow-up questions on Morocco while we're on Morocco, if I may. First one is that I noticed that, thanks to you actually, that Conoco have taken a big lump of acreage all the way around your western side and all the way as far as SDX. So first of all, I'd be interested in what your comments are about that. And second, or maybe we just answer that first.
Yeah, well, obviously that came as a big surprise to us as well. And you think, as an operator in Morocco, we'd all, and other operators would all have picked up on that when the reconnaissance license was signed by Conoco in June. But unfortunately, COVID-19 means that perhaps the reporting of events like this is not as clear at the time as in hindsight it turned out to be. So when we picked up on that last week, of course, the first thing we did was make contact with Conoco just to welcome them as our new neighbour. And I do think from the point of view of gas in Morocco and exploration in Morocco, having a company of the size of ConocoPhillips take a position during a period of COVID-19 in the country is fantastic, not just for us, but also for other operators, but particularly for us because we're right on trend. We can demonstrate materiality in due course with Conoco. And obviously, you know, it's would be nice to consider them as a potential partner down the road. But to be absolutely certain about it, we have to de-risk our prospect first by drilling to prove to them that we have the capability of delivering large gas. That's how a major works, and you know they won't prematurely do anything. That's not how it works.
Talking about SDX, one of the things that you know, at the very end of their drilling campaign, it was alleged that they were actually unable to sell their gas domestically. Now, I think I know the answer to this, but I know that I've got a lot of questions about this have come through. I wonder if you could perhaps just tell the market why it was. I think it's to do with a French motor company.
To do with what?
A French motor company.
Yeah. I think to be fair, to be absolutely fair, we're not in a position to talk about SDX specifically. They are in the best position, and we do not give countenance to any alleged comments. But what I would say is that it's fairly obvious that, and it has been announced, that companies such as Renault, who took some of the gas, obviously, from SDX, have faced very difficult situations during COVID-19, and some production has been obviously lost or reduced. Now, as I understand it, that is pretty much restored. But of course, you know, when you're dealing with a small market, that small market is very susceptible to situations like COVID-19. So in actual fact, it was a wake-up call for us. You know, we had looked at compressed natural gas, for example, local markets, but we've decided that there's going to be too much competition in the local market. It's too small a market. So we go back to our original strategy, which is to find big gas for gas to power. And we believe Morocco wants that, requires that. And more importantly, Morocco takes over the ownership of the Maghreb pipeline to Europe in 2021, full ownership. What are they going to do with it? At present, there's only gas imported from Algeria for gas to power in Morocco. So what on earth are they going to do with it in terms of the future of the pipeline in 2021? And therein lies the opportunity for us to find big gas to put into that pipeline and solve a problem for them and make money for our shareholders.
Perfect. Understood. Thank you very much. That's very clear indeed. Maybe we could move now to Trinidad, Paul, where you've got an exciting CO2 sequestration project. Maybe you can give us an idea of how it all stands in Trinidad, please.
Well, I think it would be fair to say, and it would be inappropriate of me not to admit the fact that it's taken longer than we ever anticipated to get to the stage where we are today. And we underestimated the regulatory issues in Trinidad, the difficulty of operating within those regulations on the ground with Heritage and the ministry. But what we can say, we were kind of, I won't say misled, but we were very encouraged in the first 6 months when we got the approval of the Environmental Management Authority for our project. And that was a long time ago. That was last June. So it has been quite frustrating, that part of the process. But what I would say is now, as you'll see in the corporate presentation that we uploaded today, we are in a position next month to do a production test on AT5X, again, subject to the usual regulatory approvals, which this time we don't believe will be daunting. But more importantly, we've de-risked the sequestration of CO2. We've de-risked the whole project. We've proved that our engineering design for The delivery of CO2 works. We've strengthened our hold over the CO2 supply. And, we are being approached daily on other projects in Trinidad. There is a limited CO2 supply, so it's not possible to do all the projects. So you have to put this in the context that we are all frustrated that we haven't started producing by now, not least me as the largest shareholder in Predator. This is not what I intended. But what I'm very comforted by is the fact that we've now cemented a position in Trinidad and beyond that we are a CO2 EOR specialist company. And that is a business, and that business has value. It's not just about production, it's about the value of the business and the supply that we have, exclusivity over the CO2 supply, the very, very strong relationship which we have with Malcy Gas Products, who are the CO2 supplier, and together we're looking at other opportunities. And from that point of view, and also with Heritage, obviously the state company have approached us on other projects. So we're very comfortable that we have a business and we have potentially a saleable business in the future. So it's not just about production, it's about de-risking the whole concept, which was a huge challenge in Trinidad because nobody believed we would ever get to this stage. So patience is a great virtue. I've been patient, and I'm not known as a patient person. But we are now on the cusp of something very, very important, and I'm very, very happy with that position.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, Paul. I'd like to take us on now to the situation in Ireland. It's very exciting, actually, although for some reason, it's taken longer than you thought, maybe due to internal domestic politics and so on. But I'd love to know how you feel that it all looks now, because you've got some exciting new plans for Ireland, haven't you?
We have, and obviously the deviation, if you like, to LNG wasn't necessarily on the cards at IPO, but you have to move quickly to exploit a situation. And the situation in Ireland, you can argue about the politics and how that will affect the oil and gas business there, but the fundamental issue is security of supply. And I do know that in 2021, that issue will be developed with the EU over 2021. So we know that issue isn't going to go away. So when we decided towards the end of last year to look at LNG, and that came about because we had on our board Ron Pilbeam, who has experience in LNG, and he introduced us to someone he'd worked with for many years, who is a supplier of floating regasification storage and regasification units, which sound very complicated. But the beauty about it is these units can sit offshore. They don't have the same environmental footprint as an onshore LNG plant. And we can utilize LNG that does not come from shale gas, which is an important issue in Ireland. So when the Kinsale abandonment is going ahead, the pipeline to shore, of course, may be capable of remaining in place and being used for offloading LNG. So it would be fair to say when we started this process end of last year, it was more in hope than expectation. And we were quite prepared for long haul just to get people to the table. But what's quite encouraging is the vessel owner is very keen to proceed, has a vessel available. The LNG supplier, who shall remain nameless, we signed an NDA with them on the opportunity. The engagement with the Commission for Regulating Utilities, which is one of the highest regulatory authorities in Ireland, is engaged, discussing a schedule for an LNG license, import license with us. Gas Networks Ireland, the owner of the infrastructure, is engaged with us, and we're discussing costs involved in them upgrading the network to take our gas. And the gas buyers are engaged with us and have signed NDAs. So that's all happened in 6 months. And I know people might sneer and say, well, how have you managed to do that? But you've done that because you've got 40 odd years experience in Ireland. You understand what the opportunity is, and you can move fast, and you've got long industry relationships, and everybody sees the opportunity. And of course, LNG is flavour of the month at present and will be for the foreseeable future. I think it's a really, really exciting opportunity for Predator. It will be a long haul to get all the regulatory approvals, and we estimate Q3 2023 for first gas. But the important thing is we're way ahead of the game. CRU are not even have been approached by anybody else on this option, and we have the LNG supplier, we have the vessel owner, so we're well positioned for that security of supply issue next year, and we can motor along with our regulatory approvals. And they do follow a process in Ireland. It takes time, but they do follow a process, and we will get there, I am sure. So for us, again, it's about building a business, doing the donkey work, if you like, and getting into a situation where you have a business that you can sell on, all the boxes ticked, LNG license, utilizing infrastructure. For me, it's a fantastic opportunity for us.
Excellent. One quick question overall on all your places that you work in is that when I was looking at your new presentation last night, I noticed that actually you've got CO2 sequestration in all areas. Would it be fair to say that as part of your sort of fossil fuel ambitions, you could do that everywhere you worked?
Well, I think yes, because effectively, my argument is, and a lot of people, in our side of the industry would agree with this, is that we have a CO2 emissions problem that is not going to go away in the foreseeable future. You're not going to not stop producing CO2. That's just inconceivable at present. Ultimately, one day you might, but not in, I don't see it in my lifetime, but I have a shorter lifetime than most people. But so what are you going to do with the CO2? You either try to extract it from the atmosphere, as there's some plans, talked about over the years to do that, or you bury it in the ground. So who are the people who has most experience in sequestrating CO2 in the ground? Well, I'm sorry to inform a lot of people, but it is actually the oil industry. The only commercial large-scale CO2 sequestration process industry in the world is the oil industry doing it. So, you have to rely on their expertise and understanding of the geology and the subsurface where that CO2 is retained. And you don't do that by excommunicating them. You do that by working with them jointly to see how CO2 can be stored. So we see that at the end of the day as an opportunity for us in the subsurface reservoirs that we're looking at both in Morocco. You have to remember that in Morocco, 85% of the power comes from coal and oil, and in Trinidad, where they emit something like 15,800 metric tons equivalent to CO2 into the atmosphere every day. And that is a business, and at the end of the day, CO2 sequestration has to be a commercial business. Otherwise, there's no money for it. So I think we're well positioned in that respect too. And it's not trying to be fashionable. At the end of the day, our CO2 emissions credentials, if you like, were established when we formed in 2017, 3 years ago. So we're not reacting. We always intend to be ahead of the game. We're ahead of the game for big gas in Morocco. We're ahead of the game for CO2 EOR in Trinidad, and we're ahead of the game for offshore LNG infiltration in Ireland. And that's always the way we position ourselves. Be ahead, be proactive, not reactive.
Excellent. Could I ask a couple of quick questions on funding before we go? Paul, I'm sure people would like to know how you're funded. I noticed that you did, you've probably done 2 placings, various types this year so far. And so you're well funded, but perhaps you could tell us about the placings and so on.
Yeah, we did 2 placings, raised just over 4 million sterling gross. And we also managed to get rid of our convertible loan, which I know many were unhappy with and was a drag on share price. But I make no apologies for the convertible loan because it allowed us to secure Morocco last year. And that's been justified by the fact that ConocoPhillips have come in next door. So if we hadn't secured it last year, we may have lost that block to ConocoPhillips this year. So that's important. We've basically, our capital is there to fund the well. We will look for a turnkey deal on the well in the current climate to enforce capital discipline. We have CO2 production, EOR production this year in Trinidad. We have the Moroccan bank guarantee, which again is cash in the bank. We think can be utilised also to assist us in Morocco. So we're well funded, but also we have high equity levels in all our projects. We have 3 very, very strong core businesses, and there's always the opportunity for M&A, farm down, etc., at the right price. So we're not overconfident, but very, very comfortable this year and going into next year that we can deliver our program within the means that we have already.
Excellent. And you mentioned earlier on that you and the board hold large stakes in the company. Presumably that affects your views on dilution as well.
I think dilution sometimes is a necessary evil because at the end of the day, you have to have the funds to grow your business. And when you're growing at the rate we're growing in 3 different areas, you've got to make sure that you're well funded. If you're seen as not being well funded, then you're a target. The clue's in our name. We're a predator. We're not a target. We're a predator. So we've had 2 fundraisers this year. And in hindsight, that was just probably not designed to be, but was probably one of the smartest moves we ever made. It was COVID-19 came along, locked down the market, and a lot of companies are struggling because of that. Well, we're not. We're in a prime position because of that. So we also think that going forward now we have 3 strong businesses, high equity levels in those businesses. We have the ability for M&A transactions to create more value if required. So I believe we're in a strong position, and I certainly would not be, I don't mind diluting a little bit in a project to create value, but I don't think we want to be diluting anytime soon in the shareholder base.
Excellent, and that's brilliant. We've had a good time on the interview so far. We've probably overrun a bit. Could I just ask you in the sort of final question, where you'd like to see Predator in 18 months' time?
Well, I think we will have drilled Morocco. We will have CO2 EOR production, and we potentially will have by the end of next year an LNG license. So in 18 months, I would have said we would have 3 core businesses, not individual prospects, or 3 core businesses, any of which or all of which would be saleable. So my strategy has always been that to build up a business that is at the end of the day saleable for a multiple return on the IPO share price, and that's has to be the objective of the company. So I would hope that we wouldn't still be having this conversation at the beginning of 2022. But as well as I do that you have to have an aspiration and be motivated towards it. And if you don't have that, well, you're never going to achieve anything. So this is the objective of the company. We may or may not achieve what we want to achieve by the end of next year, but we've got to try.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. My guest today has been Paul Griffiths, CEO of Predator Oil and Gas, and this has been Malcom Graham-Wood on the Core Finance London CEO interview. Thank you very much for joining us.